Well, good morning, Shelter Church. This morning we're starting off on a new series that we're calling At the Movies. And who knows what this building used to be? A movie theater. All right. So it's going to be a fun few weeks here when we'll kind of watch a clip and also pull from it. Today we're going to be talking about uncertainty. And we'll talk a little bit about the moon landing here. But first, I want to invite in some very awesome members of our church. All right. Well, you've heard us talk for a few weeks. Armor X, which all of these kids are part of, recently had a time change to Saturday morning. That's been the context you've been hearing us talk about. But we wanted to have an opportunity to invite Sensei Jason in to just share a little bit about what's happening with these members of our church here. So.
Yeah, we've got everybody. Am I on?
Yep.
We gathered everybody together. Armor X is something that we started. I'm seeing a lot of bullying going on through social media and at school, and I just wanted to get something that to start for the kids to kind of develop some mental awareness for them and some physical awareness for them to deal with that. So that's something that kind of reached out to my heart, and Ryan's talked about finding and defining, goals and things that kind of touch your heart and stepping out and kind of doing things through ways to lead through the church. And I thought that'd be a good way for me to do that.
Absolutely. And I know that I've seen a change in my two that are standing up here as well. I see increased confidence. But how has your study in martial arts helped you as an individual, and what are you hoping that will be developed in them as well?
I've definitely seen a change in all these guys. Everybody's doing great. You definitely see a confidence, and it's being gained in all these guys. And it's helped me throughout the years. Growing up, I didn't know how to fight or anything like that, and that was one of the things that I never did. Mm-hmm. And I never got in a lot of fights, but luckily. So through the years, just in martial arts, I've gained a lot of confidence, and especially in the line of work that I do in law enforcement, it's helped me out in dealing with different situations, because you never know. Obviously, we see things going on in the news that you never know what you're going to get into, so it just prepares you for life.
Absolutely. Well, what do you say, kids? Are you enjoying it? Yep. All right. Do you feel better about yourselves? Yep. Yeah. And yeah. And Sensei Jason, he talks to you a little bit each week about also, he's teaching you a physical defense with the martial arts, but he also talks to you about what Jesus can do in your lives, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Every week we take a few minutes out of the time to do a brief lesson on Jesus, and then we do a prayer at the end. So we also add the physical and the spiritual part into it as well.
All right.
So special thanks to Sensei Greg here. I have a good supporting staff with Sensei Greg, Sensei Deb, and Sensei Scarlett. The other two couldn't make it today, but they're big help, and we're just so proud of these guys and the work that they're putting in and everything that they're doing for us.
Absolutely. And if any of you know of kids or grandkids that are yours or neighbors, it happens here at 10 a.m. on Saturdays, and it's open to anyone. 4 to 12 is kind of what we say.
Yep.
So let's all give them a round of applause. All right. Absolutely. Well, hey, as I said this morning, the message that I prepared is dealing with uncertainty. And honestly, when I was writing this message through the week, I had a lot of thoughts in my mind about what sort of uncertainty to touch on and how to unpack that. But with the events that happened in the Oregon District this morning, I wasn't necessarily prepared to be up here talking about uncertainty in the wake of that. And if you don't know this about me, through the week I'm a hospice chaplain, And along with that, I tend to be a very empathetic person with grief and loss. And my empathy levels are just off the charts right now. So if I seem distracted or there's just a lot, that it's been a lot to unpack going through this morning. But as we saw a little while ago, we watched a clip from a movie called First Man that came out last year, and it was chronicling the what? The moon landing. And we just had the 50th anniversary for the moon landing, and I try to put myself in the shoes of what it was like to plan sending someone to the moon. How do you even do that? It took scientists, the brightest minds of the day, and I grew up, I had kind of an analog childhood and a digital teenagehood, being a kid of 81. And I've more or less grown up with computers, is really what I'm getting at. And when I try to imagine sending someone to the moon, where the computer that was in NASA was basically as powerful as a calculator. I mean, when Neil Armstrong, he took control of the joystick, and that wasn't, some sort of computer-enhanced interface. I mean, he basically was like flying a high-tech biplane. I don't want to I'm not putting down the Eagle, but it was not digitally enhanced. It was gut, it was instinct, it was knowledge, and all on Neil Armstrong's shoulders there, and as well as his crew. And as I was reading about the moon landing this week, I was thinking about, what is the faith background of some of these astronauts? And I actually learned something interesting that I never knew about before. And that was the very last act that Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong did right before they exited the Eagle was Buzz Aldrin pulled out a small silver chalice and some wine. Yes, they let wine on the moon. But after they flew. And they partook in communion there on the moon right before leaving that hatch. And, that spoke to me where their minds were at because, we had been to space already up to that point. But nobody had ever really opened up a hatch and climbed down a ladder and stepped onto the moon before. And when you try to put yourself in those shoes, it's no wonder why they kind of wanted to make sure that they were right with God, right? I mean, that was not fooling around. You're stepping into a vacuum of space. And but that was a path that was pointing towards uncertainty, wasn't it? It was this monumental task that took many of the brightest minds. Now, before we proceed any further, I want everybody, if you're taking notes this morning, write it down. If you're not, then just think of one for a moment. But I want you each to think about what is an element of uncertainty in your own life today, this morning. Is there financial insecurities? It can be huge, it can be small, whatever it is. Everyone always has some little element of uncertainty in their life. And I want you to just kind of pause for a moment and think about what yours is. Because whatever that is an opportunity for God to be at work in your life. And a truth that I'm going to be revisiting throughout this morning is life is uncertain, but God is not. Amen? Life is uncertain, but God is not. We don't know what tomorrow holds, but we know who holds tomorrow, right? And as Christians, the truth is that if God's in control, he should dictate how we respond in crisis situations, right? I mean, it should be a very natural flow of our faith where we just are able to boldly walk forward. But sometimes it's not quite that simple, right? We don't always get to just sit there and have faith. And I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing the importance of faith, by the way. But I want to kind of propose a little hypothetical here. Imagine if you meet a farmer, and the farmer is sitting there, and he's mad, and he's angry, and he's just looking out on his field, and on this particular year, just nothing has grown at all. He's just looking in the field, and you're looking in this field too, and you're thinking, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's some thistles and some crabgrass, like my yard, and and it's all right there, but there's all kinds of things there except for what should be there. There's no corn or wheat or soybean or whatever it is that's supposed to be there. And you say, well, we've had rain this year, right? And the farmer's like, I know. And you're like, well, what's your soil like? And he's like, well, it's perfect. It's wonderful soil. And you go, well, what kind of seed did you go out and plant? And he's like, seed? What seed? Now, you would probably look at this farmer and think you're an idiot, right? But, he wasn't able to just sit back and pray and expect God to somehow bless his field to have this ocean of golden grain, wafting in the breeze in front of him without putting forth effort and work on his part, right? I mean, God provides the rain, God provides the soil and the sun, all of those things. He makes the plants grow, but the farmer needed to do his bit, right, too? Well, I think sometimes when we're facing uncertainty, sometimes we kind of default to this posture of, well, we need to pray, we need to pray, we need to pray, we need to pray, we need to pray. And prayer, absolutely, 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 you need to pray. But sometimes there's also things that we need to do about it, right? A year ago, for instance, and I know I've mentioned this from up front before, about a year ago, my family went through Financial Peace University. It was one of the classes that Josh Clark taught here. And, to be honest, our income didn't change. And for years, my wife and I had been praying, God, just help us financially. Please, cut us a break. My parents didn't necessarily teach a lot of home economics to me when it comes to managing money. But I thought I was doing a pretty good job. And my wife also we thought that we were on top of things, as on top of things as we could. But it turns out that we were wrong. I'm not saying that we're smooth sailing, doing amazing these days, but we went from living tightly paycheck to paycheck to living with a comfort buffer now. And nothing changed other than us stepping up and stepping into that anxiety, stepping into that frustration and that uncertainty of living paycheck to paycheck and doing our part in being better stewards of that. Another thing that I've kind of been humbled to observe in these past few years is with shelter recovery. I've never really been that in tune with recovery culture. That's never been a need in my own personal life. But something that I've been humbled in watching is the need for community to overcome those things. The need for community. I hear things in recovery like if someone's fresh into a program, they might do 90 meetings in 90 days or something like that. They don't just sit alone in a room and pray, do they? If you sit alone in a room and pray, in a perfect world, I wish that would be enough, but oftentimes that's not enough, is it? The probability of someone in that point of their recovery following through isn't good. There's that need for community, that need for initiative, and that desire to step up and heal. Well, this morning, I'm going to be kind of just loosely pointing at 2 Chronicles. It goes from chapter 29 to 32, and what we see in these chapters is there's a man named Hezekiah, and Hezekiah ends up becoming the king of the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom, just a little bit before this, was invaded by Assyria and just totally conquered. And the northern kingdom of Judea never comes back ever again. So then you're left with the southern kingdom. And Hezekiah becomes king there. And he has a best friend named Isaiah, which we kind of know from the Bible. And then we also have, he's married into one of the religious tribes. And he looks at the southern kingdom, and for about 300 years, they had totally neglected their commitment to God. I mean, they were at this point using the temple basically as a giant storage room. At this point, nobody was really actively praying or engaged in their faith. At this point, they basically were just living not at all like they were God's chosen people. And for 11 years, Hezekiah interacted with this nation. And, sometimes we hear the word repentance, by the way, and it's kind of become an ugly word in our modern culture, hasn't it? Sometimes we imagine the crazy guys with the sandwich boards, repent! But repent, all that means is turn back to God. And he, for 11 years, was helping the southern kingdom of Israel turn back to God. And he was doing all of the things he was supposed to do. But then all of a sudden, you know what happens? He catches word that Assyria is invading the southern kingdom now. They didn't just stop with the northern kingdom. And so Hezekiah kind of formed a plan. And he met with his mines and his military. And what they did was they went out, and first thing was they filled in all of the wells out in the wilderness. Because if you have an invading army marching towards your cities, and they get to stop every few miles and refresh, you're kind of helping them out, aren't they? Aren't you? So they first went out and they filled in all of these wells. The next thing that they did was he looked around at crumbling segments of the walls of the cities, and he rebuilt the walls. And then he looked at what are the remaining weak points, and he built new walls in those places. So, in my one thought in my mind is, wow, the Assyrians must be moving really slow if he can do all of this, right? But anyway, it does take a while to move around in this era. And but what I see Hezekiah doing in response to this uncertainty, this invading army that he doesn't know if he's going to be able to fight off, he does three things. He blocked off the bad, he mended the broken, and he bolstered the weak. He blocked off the bad, he mended the broken, and he bolstered the weak. He stopped giving the enemy what they need and what they want. He looked at what needed fixed. And he also identified weaknesses that maybe just were apathetically existent. It was never really an issue before, but it might become an issue. And I think when we look at the uncertainties that all of us wrote down, and we look at the uncertainties that maybe some of you just kept in mind, we need to ponder, is there something that we can do about those things? Praying, absolutely, 100%. Putting your faith in God, 100%. But is there also something that God's sitting there going, yeah, but you also need to do this. You need to, if you're a farmer, you need to go out, sow your field. If you're in recovery, you still need community. You need to go to your meetings. So consider these uncertainties. And honestly, I had more written on these sorts of things until this morning, when I as I've been praying about what happened this morning, Dayton recently went through a tornado. If you haven't heard. And a lot of my days going out into Trotwood, you look around, and in years past, when I've seen hurricanes through the perspective of the TV and the news cycle, hurricanes are there, they're bad, they're horrible, and then about a month later, what happens? You just kind of stop hearing about them. And then floods, like the flood in Louisiana or the flood in Houston, that they're horrible. We rise to the action, we step up, we go out, we do something, and then about a month later, what happens? We stop hearing about them. But now that one has hit here at home, and I drive out through Trotwood 5 days a week, I'm looking around, and it's in a lot of areas. I mean, sure, maybe some of the trees have been cleaned up, but structurally wise and infrastructure wise, I mean, it's still like the first week for some homes and for some apartments. Now, that's not to say we haven't made headway in recovering, but there's a lasting thing there, isn't there? There's a lasting presence. And then this morning, when there was the shooter in the Oregon district, that took 9 lives and wounded 26 more. 10 dead total, including the shooter. I look at that, and it's kind of another uncertainty that we can't do anything about, can we? I mean, don't get me wrong, with like tornadoes, we can make sure that all of the neighborhoods moving forward have functioning tornado sirens. We learned that some neighborhoods, apparently, they didn't work. And I know that there's policies and things that could be navigated to help curb future shootings. But when it comes to like man versus nature conflicts, there's not a whole lot that we can do beyond just doing common sense prep work. And when it comes to man versus man conflicts, I'm relapsing into my literature class here. When it comes to man versus man conflicts, you have to acknowledge that there's just that presence of evil. And even though we can do things to try to curb those things from happening, the bottom line is that there's evil at work in the world. And if somebody's going to do evil, they're going to find some way of doing it. And if you let your mind linger on that type of uncertainty, whether if it's a natural uncertainty, we can't live in fear day in and day out of another tornado, can we? We can't live our lives in fear. And similar with the shooting incident, we can't become slaves to fear, can we? The one song that we sing in worship says, "I am no longer a slave to fear, I am a child of God." And if we're going to speak those words, sing them through a joyful noise, if we're going to joyfully say, "I am no longer a slave to fear," then we can't let ourselves react out of fear. We need to react to some extent out of compassion and common sense. But then we also need to look and really embrace the brokenness that exists in our community. And there's only one solution for that brokenness. And every day, or every Sunday when we come into this auditorium, we walk past the church mission statement that says to lead everybody into a life-changing relationship with Jesus. And I know that might seem extremely optimistic, everybody in the Dayton area. But that's a thing. That's something that we need to keep our minds on. That's kind of one of the whole points of Christianity, is that his love was poured out for all of mankind. And that shouldn't be communicated to others through just more hate and more anger or any negativity like that, but through just genuine, compassionate, selfless love poured out into the world. And so I hope, to a degree, moving forward, that I guess I don't know it by heart, but to a degree, the Serenity Prayer comes to mind. Let's have the wisdom to know what we can change, right? And if there is an uncertainty in your life that God is waiting for you to step up and make a change in, do it. And if there's an uncertainty in your life that maybe you just genuinely can't do anything about it, then you need to make sure to put it in God's hands and to also be carrying out the mission of God, spreading his love into the world. Because sometimes those brokennesses, those stems of brokenness in our world, is caused by people who are lonely, are caused by people who are afraid, are caused by people who are fueled by whatever fuel the enemy has whispered into their ear. And we need to make sure to bring the cure to that brokenness into the world, shouldn't we? Now, I am going to invite everyone forward for a time of corporate prayer here. I'll kind of open up with prayer, and From there, I'd like to open up an opportunity for everybody to just be able to raise up your voice and pray. And if it's about what's happened this morning, or honestly yesterday in Texas as well, my mind's been on this morning here, but let's not forget that the city of El Paso a day ago was going through this very same kind of sense of shock and humility. If we want to raise up the families, the first responders, and so on. And honestly, if you need to lift up an uncertainty in your own life, don't be tempted to believe that you're making a tragedy about you then, because this morning is about addressing those uncertainties. And if that uncertainty is something frightening like what happened in the Oregon district, then let's lift that up. But if that uncertainty is in your life, is something personal, you're welcome to as well. You don't have to. I'm not going to make you. But know that it's open. If you need to move on and go home, I understand. But at this time, I'd like to invite everybody forward and let's spend some time in corporate prayer about that this morning. So.